Keanu Reeves lost his child before he ever got to hold her. 18 months later, the woman he loved was killed in a car accident. At the same time, his sister was fighting leukemia. And while all of this was happening, the world was applauding him as Neo. Most people think Keanu Reeves is kind because life was good to him. The truth is darker. He became kind because life took almost everything from him, and he chose not to become cruel. But how does a man survive this much loss, and still choose kindness? Keanu Reeves rarely talks about his pain. There were no public breakdowns. No dramatic interviews. No desperate attempts to explain himself to the world. Instead, there were quiet moments people barely noticed. A Hollywood star riding the subway alone. A man sitting on a park bench, holding a sandwich, staring into nothing. A face that looked calm, but carried something heavy behind the eyes. While tabloids celebrated his success, Keanu was quietly dividing his life between film sets and hospital rooms. While audiences applauded his performances, he was learning how to exist with loss, without letting it spill outward. The internet later turned one of those moments into a joke. Sad Keanu. But sadness wasn't new to him. It had already taken root long before the world noticed. Behind the scenes, Keanu was giving away millions of dollars to causes he never attached his name to. He was cutting his own salary so others could be paid more. He was choosing simplicity in a city addicted to excess. Not because he wanted to be admired, but because something inside him refused to harden. Fame followed him everywhere, yet he remained distant from it. Attention surrounded him, yet he walked alone. Success arrived, yet it never erased the silence waiting for him at home. Most people assume kindness comes from comfort. That generosity grows from abundance. That gentle people have lived gentle lives. But Keanu Reeves challenges that belief. Because sometimes, kindness is not a personality trait. Sometimes, it is a decision made after life has already taken too much. And that raises a question far more important than his fame, his roles, or his success. What kind of childhood shapes a man who can carry this much loss, and still choose compassion? Long before Keanu Reeves learned how to survive public tragedy, he learned something far more personal, and far more permanent. He learned what it feels like to lose someone without explanation. Keanu was just a child when his father disappeared from his life. There was no final conversation, no clear ending, no moment that helped a young mind understand why someone you love simply stops coming home. His father struggled with addiction and eventually went to prison, but for Keanu, the details mattered less than the outcome. One day, his father was there. And then, he wasn't. For a child, abandonment doesn't arrive as logic. It arrives as a question that never gets answered. Keanu grew up in a household where stability was always temporary. His mother moved frequently, changed relationships, and chased opportunities that required constant relocation. By the time Keanu reached his teenage years, he had lived in multiple countries and attended several different schools. Just as he began to recognize a place as familiar, it was time to leave again. Every move meant starting over. Every goodbye happened before a real attachment could form. That kind of childhood doesn't create loud rebellion. It creates quiet observation. Keanu became the kid who watched more than he spoke. The one who didn't demand attention, because attention was never guaranteed to stay. He learned early that people are temporary, and that loving too loudly might hurt later. School offered little comfort. Keanu struggled with dyslexia, a challenge that made reading slow, frustrating, and often humiliating. Teachers didn't always understand. Classmates didn't always have patience. He wasn't the loud troublemaker, but he wasn't the confident achiever either. He simply felt out of place. That sense of not being enough followed him everywhere. Not smart enough. Not settled enough. Not rooted enough. But inside that discomfort, something else was quietly forming. Because when a child grows up without certainty, without permanence, without a safe emotional anchor, they begin developing a different kind of strength, one built on endurance rather than confidence. Keanu learned how to adapt. How to read a room. How to stay calm when everything around him felt unstable. And most importantly, he learned how to survive loss without turning it into anger. Instead of hardening, he softened. Instead of lashing out, he withdrew inward. Instead of demanding the world explain itself, he accepted that it wouldn't. This early emotional conditioning would later explain so much about the man he became. Why fame never seemed to intoxicate him. Why loss didn't make him bitter. Why silence felt more natural to him than noise. Because long before hospital corridors and funerals entered his life, Keanu Reeves had already learned how to live with absence. And that raises a crucial question, one that will follow him into adulthood, fame, and unimaginable grief. If abandonment shaped the foundation of his life, how did it prepare him for the losses that were still to come? Keanu Reeves didn't discover acting because he dreamed of fame. He discovered it because it was the first place that didn't push him away. On stage, movement was allowed. Silence was allowed. Emotion didn't have to be explained, it just had to be felt. For a young man who struggled with reading, struggled with roots, and struggled with feeling enough, acting offered something rare, permission to exist without apology. Local theater became his refuge. Not glamorous. Not celebrated. Just a space where effort mattered more than background. But when Keanu stepped toward film and television, the world reminded him quickly that refuge doesn't come easily. Casting directors didn't know where to place him. He wasn't sharp-edged enough. Not polished enough. Not loud enough. Some called him stiff. Others said he lacked range. A few dismissed him entirely as a presence without depth. In an industry obsessed with instant clarity, Keanu was an unanswered question, and unanswered questions are often ignored. His early roles reflected that uncertainty. Small parts. Forgettable names. Characters that passed through scenes without leaving a mark. Even when Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure brought him recognition, it came with a cost. Audiences laughed. Studios noticed. But the label stuck. The goofy guy. The clueless one. The actor no one expected to grow. Keanu felt it. Every audition. Every meeting. Every sideways glance that said, "This is probably as far as you'll go." Yet he stayed. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't demand better roles. He didn't reshape himself to fit trends. He worked. Quietly. Consistently. Without bitterness. While others networked aggressively, Keanu studied. While others played the Hollywood game, he learned his craft the long way, through repetition, rejection, and resilience. He treated even the smallest roles as something worth honoring, because for him, acting wasn't a stepping stone. It was a lifeline. And slowly, something shifted. Directors began to notice his sincerity. His stillness. The way the camera lingered on him, not because he was explosive, but because he was real. There was a gravity beneath his awkwardness, a depth beneath his restraint. Keanu wasn't loud enough to force his way forward. But he was patient enough to wait until the right door opened. And when it finally did, it wouldn't just change his career. It would place him directly in the path of a level of fame and pressure he had never prepared for. What happens when a man who has spent his life feeling replaceable suddenly becomes impossible to ignore? Keanu Reeves didn't arrive at fame in a blaze of ego or ambition. He stepped into it the same way he had stepped into everything else, quietly, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether it would stay. The first real shift came with Point Break in 1991. For the first time, audiences saw Keanu not as a punchline, but as presence. There was intensity behind his calm, a sense that he was holding something back rather than trying to show off. The camera didn't chase him, it waited for him. Then came speed. A simple concept. Relentless pacing. And suddenly, Keanu Reeves was everywhere. Posters. Interviews. Headlines. Studios no longer questioned whether he could lead a film. They assumed it. But what most people didn't notice was how he reacted to it. He didn't indulge. He didn't transform into a different person. He didn't act like someone who had finally made it. Fame didn't thrill him. It unsettled him. Because attention brings expectations, and expectations demand certainty. Keanu had spent his entire life adapting, observing, surviving. Now the world wanted him to be defined. To be packaged. To be consistent. And then, in 1999, everything accelerated beyond control. The Matrix wasn't just a film. It was a cultural shockwave. Neo became a symbol of awakening, doubt, and hidden power, a man who never believed he was special until the world forced him to confront it. And audiences didn't just connect to the character. They sensed the actor inside him. Keanu's restraint worked where others might have overplayed the role. His stillness gave Neo weight. His uncertainty felt real. His silence carried meaning. Overnight, he wasn't just famous. He was iconic. The world applauded. Hollywood crowned him. Success, money, recognition, everything people believe should fix a life, arrived all at once. But something inside Keanu remained unchanged. The childhood loneliness didn't disappear. The sense of impermanence didn't fade. And the quiet fear that everything good could vanish at any moment still lingered beneath the surface. Because fame doesn't erase emotional memory. It only amplifies what's already there. And just as Keanu Reeves reached the highest point of his career, life began preparing its most devastating lesson, one that would test whether success could truly protect him from loss. If fame couldn't shield him from pain, what happens when tragedy strikes at the very peak of his life? Tragedy didn't enter Keanu Reeves' life as a single event. It arrived in waves, close enough together that he barely had time to breathe between them. While the world saw him as a global icon after The Matrix, Keanu was quietly living a second life, one measured not in box office numbers, but in hospital visits, medical updates, and the constant fear of losing someone he loved. His sister, Kim Reeves, was diagnosed with leukemia. For years, Keanu lived with uncertainty as a daily companion. Treatments worked. Then they didn't. Hope appeared. Then it faded. He never spoke about it publicly, never used it to shape his image. But privately, it reshaped his priorities. Money stopped meaning what it used to mean. Time became fragile. Presence became everything. He structured his work around her health. He funded research. He showed up. Not as a celebrity, but as a brother who understood how quickly life could disappear. And then, just as he was holding that fragile balance together, life took another turn. In 1999, Keanu and his partner, Jennifer Syme, were expecting their first child. For someone who had spent his entire life without a stable sense of family, this wasn't just joy, it was grounding. It was the possibility of something permanent. Something that stayed. But that hope didn't last. Their daughter was stillborn. There are losses that shatter loudly. This one shattered in silence. No celebration. No future to imagine. Just an empty space where something should have been. Keanu didn't speak about it. He didn't explain it. He absorbed it. Grief didn't explode outward. It collapsed inward. The relationship with Jennifer strained under the weight of something neither of them knew how to carry. Love remained, but grief changes people. And sometimes, it changes them in opposite directions. They separated. And then, just as the wound was beginning to scar over, tragedy returned one final time, without warning, without mercy. 18 months later, Jennifer Syme died in a car accident. In a single chapter of his life, Keanu lost his child, his partner, and the illusion that success could protect him from anything. The world still saw Neo. Still saw premieres. Still saw success. But Keanu Reeves was quietly learning how to exist in a life where everything that mattered most had been taken away. And the question was no longer whether he could endure loss. It was whether he could continue living without letting it destroy who he was. After Jennifer Syme's death, Keanu Reeves didn't collapse in public. There were no headlines about breakdowns, no visible self-destruction, no scandal for the world to consume. Instead, something quieter happened. He withdrew. Premieres felt meaningless. Interviews felt invasive. Applause felt disconnected from the reality he was living. While Hollywood continued to celebrate him as a global star, Keanu moved through his days carrying grief that had nowhere to go. He stopped talking, not out of bitterness, but out of exhaustion. Grief had changed the way he experienced time. Days felt heavier. Nights felt longer. Silence became familiar, almost comforting, because it was the only space where he didn't have to perform strength. People around him noticed the shift. He became more private, more reserved, more distant from the industry that once defined him. But beneath that distance wasn't emptiness, it was restraint. Keanu understood something many people never learn. Grief doesn't disappear just because you're successful. It doesn't care how admired you are. It doesn't negotiate. It simply stays. And so he learned to coexist with it. He simplified his life even further. He avoided excess. He rejected the distractions that Hollywood offered so easily. Not because he was punishing himself, but because noise made the pain louder. During this period, the internet captured an image that would later go viral. A man sitting alone on a park bench. A sandwich in his hands. His shoulders slightly forward. his gaze unfocused. Sad Keanu. The world laughed, turned it into a meme, moved on. But what they didn't see was the truth behind that moment. That wasn't sadness for the camera. That wasn't performative loneliness. That was simply a man existing between moments, carrying grief without asking anyone to notice. Keanu never corrected the narrative. He never defended himself. He never explained. Because grief doesn't need explanation. It needs space. And in that space, something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming hardened, Keanu became more attentive to others. He noticed suffering more quickly. He listened longer. He gave more quietly. Pain had stripped him down, and in doing so, it had removed his need for ego. He wasn't trying to be inspirational. He was trying to survive with his humanity intact. This period marked the lowest emotional point of his life, but also the moment where his future quietly began to change direction. Because when everything familiar is taken away, what remains is not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are. And that raises the next question, the one that defines the rest of his story. How does a man rebuild a life after grief has taken everything familiar from it? Rebuilding didn't begin for Keanu Reeves with a revelation. There was no dramatic decision, no moment of sudden clarity, no speech about starting over. It began quietly, with acceptance. Keanu stopped asking life to give back what it had taken. He stopped searching for meaning in loss, and instead focused on something simpler, how to live with it without becoming someone he didn't recognize. He chose routine over chaos, silence over distraction, presence over escape. His life became smaller, not out of sadness, but out of intention. He walked. He rode his motorcycle. He kept his circle close and his world manageable. Grief didn't vanish, but it softened when it was no longer fought. And then, almost unexpectedly, a role appeared that mirrored his inner world. John Wick. On the surface, it was an action film, stylized, violent, kinetic. But beneath the choreography was something deeper. A man who had lost his wife. A man whose grief was underestimated. A man whose pain wasn't loud, but absolute. Keanu didn't need to imagine that state of mind. He had lived it. He understood what it meant to wake up to absence. To feel a future collapse without warning. To carry love for someone who was no longer there, and still keep moving forward. The performance resonated in a way no one expected. Audiences didn't just see strength. They saw restraint. They saw grief transformed into focus. They saw a man who wasn't fighting for glory, but for meaning. John Wick revived his career, but more importantly, it aligned with who he had become. Keanu returned to Hollywood without surrendering to it. He didn't chase attention. He didn't reinvent himself. He allowed his work to speak quietly, the same way he lived. Behind the scenes, stories continued to surface. He gave up portions of his salary so others could be paid fairly. He honored stunt teams and crew members as equals. He listened more than he spoke. These weren't acts of redemption. They were extensions of a life reshaped by loss. Keanu Reeves wasn't rebuilding himself into someone new. He was rebuilding himself into someone truer. And in doing so, he discovered something many never do. Grief doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can become the place where your values finally become clear. Which leads to the final question of his journey. What kind of legacy does a man leave when he chooses compassion over bitterness, again and again? By the time Keanu Reeves entered the later chapters of his life, something about him felt different, not polished, not triumphant, but grounded. He was no longer trying to prove anything to Hollywood, and Hollywood, in turn, stopped trying to change him. His legacy wasn't shaped by loud reinventions or carefully managed comebacks. It grew quietly, through stories that spread without permission. Crew members talked about how he learned their names, all of them. Stunt performers shared how he gave up portions of his salary so their work could be properly compensated. People spoke about moments when he sat and listened, without checking his phone, without rushing the conversation, without reminding anyone who he was. These weren't gestures designed to be seen. Most of them weren't seen at all. Keanu had learned something grief teaches better than success ever could: everyone is carrying something invisible. That awareness shaped how he moved through the world. He didn't dominate rooms. He didn't compete for attention. He treated fame like a tool, useful, but dangerous if held too tightly. When interviews asked him about loss, he never dramatized it. He spoke carefully, sometimes awkwardly, choosing words that reflected acceptance rather than bitterness. He acknowledged pain without letting it define him. "I miss the people who are gone," he once said. "I hope they're okay." No metaphors. No speeches. Just truth. As social media amplified his quiet behavior, the world began to notice. Not because he demanded admiration, but because authenticity had become rare. In an industry fueled by excess and self-promotion, Keanu Reeves stood out by refusing to play the same game. People didn't admire him for being flawless. They admired him for being consistent. Consistent in humility. Consistent in generosity. Consistent in treating others as equals. His films continued to succeed, but his reputation transcended cinema. He became a symbol, not of invincibility, but of resilience without cruelty. Proof that suffering doesn't have to make you hard. Proof that surviving loss doesn't require losing your humanity. Keanu Reeves never claimed to be a role model. He simply lived in a way that reminded others of who they wanted to be. And that may be the most powerful legacy of all. But every journey that inspires others eventually reaches its final reflection, the moment where the story stops looking backward, and begins speaking directly to the listener. So what does Keanu Reeves' life ultimately teach us about pain, survival, and the choice to remain human? Keanu Reeves' life was never a straight line toward success. It was a series of interruptions, moments where life paused him, tested him, and asked the same question again and again. Who will you become after this? He lost a father before he could understand why. He spent his childhood without roots, learning how to live lightly because nothing stayed. He reached the peak of fame only to discover that success does not shield the heart. He lost a child. He lost the woman he loved. He lived alongside illness, uncertainty, and grief that never fully disappears. And yet, through all of it, he did something quietly extraordinary. He did not turn his pain outward. He did not let bitterness become his identity. He did not use suffering as an excuse to harm others. Instead, he chose something far more difficult. He chose restraint. He chose humility. He chose kindness, not once, but repeatedly, especially when no one was watching. Keanu Reeves reminds us that resilience is not about how loudly you fight back. It is about how gently you continue. There is no moment in his story where the pain magically resolves. No chapter where loss is overcome and neatly packaged into inspiration. His grief remains part of him, not as a wound, but as a teacher. It taught him that time is fragile. That presence matters more than status. That everyone you meet is carrying something invisible. And perhaps that is why his kindness feels different. It is not rehearsed. It is not strategic. It is not loud. It is lived. In a world that often rewards cruelty, speed, and self-interest, Keanu Reeves stands as proof that strength can be quiet, and still unbreakable. He shows us that you don't need to be untouched by suffering to be good. Sometimes, you are good because you were touched by it. You don't get to choose what life takes from you. But you do get to choose what you carry forward. Keanu carried compassion. He carried humility. He carried a deep respect for human fragility. And in doing so, he left behind something more lasting than fame. A reminder that even after unbearable loss, you can still choose to be gentle. You can still choose to be human. And sometimes, that choice is the most powerful legacy of all.